Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a musician and the author of the nonfiction book Portraits of White, Hope and Inspiration for Those Who Struggle with the Holidays, which was inspired by the author's refusal to celebrate Christmas when she was 33 years old. Her name is Frances Drost, and my interview with Frances will follow the teleportation sound. Frances Drost, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And is this episode number 301?
There's quite a few episodes I've got to upload before this one, so this will probably be somewhere in like the 310s, 320s.
Oh, okay. Well, congratulations on reaching 300, though. That's exciting.
Feel free to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and as well as what happened in your life that caused you not to celebrate Christmas when you were 33 years old.
Well, I am from South Central Pennsylvania, between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, sort of near Harrisburg. And I was a farm girl, and I was the baby of the family. We had a great family. We lived on a farm. But when I was 6 months old, my brother, who had just turned 2, drowned accidentally in our pond. And then when I turned 7, I lost another brother who was killed in a farm accident. And it really shaped the landscape of our family. And so I had a couple other siblings who were 7 and 9 years older than me. But because they were older than me, once they grew up and moved out of the house, I felt really alone, and I struggled with bouts of loneliness and sadness, and my mother would try to console me. In the meantime, I was learning to play the piano. I had played by ear, and I loved to play the piano. So between farming and music and so forth, that was sort of my background. And then I noticed just this lingering sadness in my life, and it was especially prevalent at the holidays. And obviously it makes sense now, but as a young girl and a young woman, I didn't put the two together between the loss of siblings and the holidays and the sadness and so forth. But so one year, 1999, I was 33, and it was September. My husband and I were on an anniversary trip, and he got really sick. So I left him in the hotel room and wandered out into a Christmas shop. And in the middle of that Christmas shop, I suddenly just had this deep longing to say, you know what, I want to stop this pattern of loneliness and sadness and figure out what's really going on. So that was the year I decided I'm just going to skip Christmas. And when I say that, I mean all the stuff that goes with it, the gift giving, direct decorating, stuff that is fun. But if you struggle with dysfunction in your life in any way, all that stuff and the pressure around the holidays, family get together. And of course, our family wasn't complete anymore. And so in a nutshell, that's what happened to me. Of course, I'm a musician. So in that year when I decided to skip the holidays, in doing that, I have found that I think it's partly just distraction. It's a method we can use when we're focused on something and we remove our focus for a while and focus on something else. It actually opens up ways for us to see what's really going on in our lives. And so I think it was the distraction of deciding not to do the typical things I did at the holidays that opened up my life and my soul to just go, let's really figure out what's going on here under the surface. And out of that, I began writing songs, and that turned into a Christmas album. And then it became a show because I discovered there were other people who struggled with the holidays, like silently. It's kind of something I find we don't like to talk about so much. So that became quite a journey for me. And then I just recently wrote a book, and it actually all started kind of as a song about snow. I love snow. I love wintertime. So it all kind of converged with snow and Christmas and a Christmas shop. And that's the nutshell of my story.
Your book is called Portraits of White, Hope and Inspiration for Those Who Struggle with the Holidays. Without spoiling too much of it, what is it about?
It is about that journey of skipping the holidays, trying to figure out why I struggled with the holidays, why I had lingering sadness, why those feelings were especially strong during the holidays. And so I share it from a songwriting perspective and a sibling who lost a brother, and how I began to make the connection between losing a sibling and how it affected my holidays, and how writing about it in my journal and writing it through songs helped me to change how I feel about the holidays.
How long did it take you to write the book, and how personally difficult was it for you to write the book?
Once I decided to write the book, it took me 5 months. I mean, I just set aside pretty much everything else in my life and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then I got an editor and had to rewrite. And I would say that actually writing the book was not as difficult as living the life I wrote about. I feel like I had done the hard work, the deep work. And now when I sat down to write it out as a story, I could see it from the 30,000 foot view. And I could go, I can see how this is a much bigger story than just skipping the holidays and just losing siblings and just trying to become a better songwriter. This is really my journey to find Christmas, and I think others would relate to that. So in one way, I feel like it took me a lifetime to write the book, but in actual writing, it took me 5-6 months.
What are the easiest and hardest parts about writing a book for you, and how difficult was the transition from being a musician to writing a book?
Oh, those are such great questions. I'm focused on the second question. What was the first question?
What are the easiest and hardest parts about writing a book for you?
Okay, well, I think the easiest part is the emotional exertion of getting it all on paper, because I've always journaled, so I'm used to expressing my thoughts on paper. The hardest part is putting it all together, connecting the dots, deciding what to cut out, sharing, letting go of things I wanted to share, putting in things that, they're interesting to me. Will they connect with my reader? And then what was the second question?
What was the transition from being a musician to writing a book like for you?
Oh, yes, that's a great question too. As a songwriter, I had to, in some ways, disconnect from how you write a song, because in a song, typically you only have 2.5, 3 minutes to tell your story. And I'd worked so hard at becoming a good songwriter, and now I had to transition into developing my thoughts and making it, sharing the story, the bigger story of my life. So my editor had to sometimes say, Frances, this writing is different than writing your songs. So try to think in that way.
Is it correct that Morgan James Publishing is the publisher of your book, Portraits of White? And what was it like to work with Morgan James on your book?
That's correct. Morgan James Publishing is the publisher of my book. It's been amazing to work with them. As an independent musician, I know what it's like to have a product and try to get it out to the global community. Where working with Morgan James Publishing, I had more of a team around me, and they were able to look at the big picture of my book, and they came up with the subtext, the subtitle of the book. They were able to bring a perspective of what sells and why my story might connect with a niche of people who struggle with the holidays. So I felt like I had a team around me. The challenge for me has been, I've been so used to being an independent musician that I'm still learning what does the publisher do, what do I do, that kind of thing. But they've really let me speak into the book, and even the cover. I said I'd like to base it around my album cover, that it matches, and so they willingly did that. And it was fun to work with people who know the book industry and yet trust me that I know my story. And that's part of the heart behind Morgan James Publishing. Their heart is to work more in connection with the author and walk alongside them, and not just take their product and make it what they want and put it out.
In addition to the Portraits of White book, there's also a Portraits of White Christmas music album, and I'll link to the Bandcamp page for that on the text description of the episode once it's uploaded. How did that album arise out of your personal struggle? Well,
it did start with the song Portraits of White, which is a fun song about snow, and it's influenced by Enya, the Irish songwriter. So it has that flavor. And I just remember when I wrote that song in particular, feeling like, wow, I see potential in that song, and I think I'd like to have a Christmas album. So that was the seed for the Christmas album. And then the year I skipped Christmas, I had a dream where I was writing a song. I just took extra time to go for walks, to meditate, spiritual journaling and prayer. And through that, song ideas came to me. And after a couple of years of writing, I approached my producer and said, I think I have a Christmas album here. And he said, yeah, send me the song ideas. And so I did. And I'll never forget, he called me and said, Frances, these songs, this is actually what he said, leave it to Frances to write suicidal Christmas songs. And he said, you really need to rewrite these, which meant I realized I needed to rewrite my life and my experience around Christmas, because I write out of life experiences. So those songs were reflecting how I felt about Christmas, and I didn't even realize it. In fact, I had a lot of things about death and sadness in my songs, not just my Christmas songs, but many of my songs. And so that began a journey of rewriting my songs. And it took a few years. That became the deep work around, I mean, maybe some songwriters can just sit down and edit a song and make it into what it should be. But I seem to have to work through it emotionally and just really dig deep in my heart to come up with what I come up with. And so after a few years of doing that and working around the holiday stuff and baggage that I had, I rewrote the songs, and then I reapproached him and said, what do you think of this? He said, now these are much, much better. Let's do an album. So that became my album, and that's how the songs came about.
What genre or genres of music do you perform, and what are some songs and albums you've performed outside of the Portraits of White album?
Oh, you think of great questions. I have done a couple instrumental albums with just piano. I have one called Sunrise Meditations that's piano and nature. I did that during COVID. I had fans send in sounds of nature around them, wherever they lived, and it just turned out beautifully. I have a classical background, so my classical music has shown up in an album I did with another artist. She plays oboe and English horn. So we did a Christmas album called Midwinter's Gift. And that is purely public domain classic Christmas songs. And it is just beautiful. So she and I perform a lot together in our duo, but I also go out and do my songs. And Other songs, really, I would say I'm probably mostly inspirational in my music, but I have that classical flair and even sometimes folk. In fact, my producer said, I don't know quite what to do with you because of the songwriting that you write. It's a little bit here and there, but um, mainly I'd say I'm piano based, but of course, Portraits of White has more of an orchestra flair, and other albums have more of a folk flair. So it varies.
How has music played a role in your grief journey?
Oh, wow. Um, it has inspired me. It has guided me. It has been my companion. I would say it filled that hole when I was young, when I was little, and I was lonely. And my mother would tell me the story of my brother drowning and how that I would have had a playmate. He was only a year and a half older than I was. And so I always felt that hole. And sometimes she would say to me, maybe you have your piano gift to, I don't know, I never know what word to use because it could never replace a person. But I know she was always trying to comfort me, but maybe it was something I was given to fill in that hole. And I never knew what to do with that as a child. But the bottom line is, I did love to practice. I loved playing the piano. And then when I began writing music in my 20s and 30s, it became my way of expressing, but also discovering myself and who I am, my temperament, my thoughts, and how I view life.
What have you learned from paying attention to emotional pain during the holiday season?
Oh, I've learned that on the other side of it, you can change how you view the holidays, which for me is just huge. This time of year, we can already some of us already start going, oh man, the holidays are coming. What am I going to do? Am I going to go here? Am I going to go there? What if I can't afford the gifts I'd like to give? There's just so much stuff that goes around in our hearts when we start approaching the holidays. And it feels so good to feel like I've done the work. I understand. I'm not like 100%, oh yeah, here come the holidays. And it's not a magic pill, but identifying the struggle you have, whether it's Christmas or anything else in your life, paying attention to the pain and then understanding what it is and where it comes from is half the battle. Because now I can go, oh, that's what that is. And here's some steps I can take to not fall into that pattern of loneliness and dread of the holidays. And now I feel like in doing the work around writing the book and putting it all together, I feel like my message for my audience has become even stronger, and I feel more passionate than ever, because when we pay attention to the pain, something beautiful comes out of that. And in fact, one of my heroes is Snowflake Bentley. He lived in the early 1900s, and he's the one who's credited for discovering that no two snowflakes are alike. He gave his life to studying snow. And he says that the most beautiful snowflakes come at the end of the storm. And I love that analogy because I feel like I've been through a lot of storms. And some of the most beautiful things now are coming out of that experience. And snowflakes are formed by elements of the air, cold, moisture, wind, and they all affect the snowflake as it falls from the sky. And that's just like us. Every one of us is different. And the elements that have affected our lives are different, and they shape who we are. But every single one of us is beautiful, and our story is beautiful. And so I feel like, man, it has been extremely painful to walk this journey, but I love some of the things coming out of it.
My final question for this interview, what advice do you have for people who struggle with the holiday season for whatever reason or reasons?
Number one, you're not alone. you're not weird. Number two, it's okay that you struggle. And number three, pay attention to those feelings, whether it be through journaling them or just taking time to go for walks, or just acknowledge that you have that struggle, and then begin to pay attention to where it might be coming from, and allow yourself to find ways then to express. For me, it was through music. For others, it might be painting or writing or, I don't know, speaking or taking courses, just something that intrigues you and feels connected to the pain that you're feeling. But just, I think the biggest thing is you're not alone, and you can change your emotions around the holidays.
Frances, you were an amazing and insightful guest. I thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Aaron. Thanks for what you do.
If you struggle with celebrating the holiday season, I hope you find solace reading Frances's book. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Have a safe and happy holiday season. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.